For 10 years, he survived wars, ambushes, and deserts that tried to break him, but nothing prepared him for what waited on the outside. The man everyone once called Soldier was now just another ghost wandering through glass towers, until he accepted one job that seemed simple enough: protect a billionaire CEO locked in a high-stakes corporate war. Yet the moment their eyes met, something inside him jolted. A buried memory, a scar he didn't know was still alive. And as mysterious acts of sabotage closed in around her, he realized a terrifying truth. The woman who needed protection might be the same one who destroyed his life years ago. And this time, someone out there was determined to take them both down. For 10 years, his world had been defined by the grit of sand, the distant echo of conflict, and the unwavering bond of brotherhood. Now, it was the suffocating silence of polished marble and the cold, sterile air of a corporate skyscraper. The man they called Soldier stood at attention, though no one had given him an order. It was a posture etched into his very bones, a mask of discipline that hid the deep weariness in his eyes. After a decade in the Special Forces, the civilian world felt like a foreign country, one whose language he couldn't speak and whose customs he couldn't understand. His search for love, for a place to belong, had been a quiet, relentless campaign that ended in a series of defeats, leaving him more isolated than any solo reconnaissance mission ever had. He was here for one reason: money, not for himself, but for the only man who had ever felt like a father. His former commanding officer's small workshop, a place of grease, steel, and sanctuary, was failing. The debts were piling up like sandbags against a flood, and this job was the only lifeline he could find: a short-term contract. The recruiter had said, high-paying bodyguard for a CEO during a high-stakes merger. It sounded simple enough. Protect the asset. He'd protected entire platoons. How hard could one person be? He straightened the collar of the crisp but unfamiliar suit, feeling more exposed in it than he ever had in full combat gear. The weight of his mentor's future pressed down on him, a burden heavier than any rucksack. This wasn't about pride or purpose. It was about survival, not his own, but that of the last piece of his past that mattered. The office doors slid open with a whisper, and she emerged. She wasn't just a CEO, she was a force of nature condensed into a sharp, elegant form. Her name was Eleanor Vance, and she moved with the kind of intimidating perfection that made the air itself seem to part for her. Her gaze was a weapon, sharp and dismissive, sweeping over him for a fraction of a second before deeming him unimportant. She saw a tool, another employee to be managed, a necessary inconvenience to ensure her safety while she navigated the treacherous waters of a multi-billion-dollar merger that would solidify her already immense fortune. He saw the embodiment of a world that had no place for him, a world of abstract wealth and cold ambition. As their eyes met for that fleeting moment, a strange current passed between them. A flicker of familiarity, like a half-remembered dream, tugged at the edge of his mind. He was certain he'd never seen her before, yet some part of him recoiled, a ghost of a memory he couldn't name. He saw a similar flicker in her eyes, a momentary pause in her stride, before her expression hardened back into a mask of impenetrable authority. She dismissed the feeling, and him, in the same instant. "You're the new security," she stated, not as a question, but as a fact she was already bored with. Her voice was as crisp and cold as the glass and steel surrounding them. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, his own voice a low, steady rumble. She didn't offer a handshake or a welcome. She simply turned, expecting him to follow. "My schedule is absolute. Your job is to be invisible until you're needed. The protocols are on your device. Read them. Memorize them. Do not deviate from them." Each word was a perfectly polished stone, dropped into the silence between them. It wasn't the orders that stung. He was a man built on orders. It was the detached condescension, the casual way she stripped him of his humanity and reduced him to a function. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in a decade, a humiliation that unknowingly reopened a scar so old he'd forgotten it was there. His jaw tightened, a subtle shift only another soldier would notice. The professional in him took control, locking away the man who felt the sting of that old wound. His mission was clear: protect her. But as he fell into step 3 paces behind her, a silent shadow in her glittering world, a new conflict began to rage within him. He had to protect the very woman who, for reasons he couldn't yet comprehend, felt like an old and bitter enemy. The first week was a study in sterile silence. He learned the rhythms of her life, the pre-dawn espresso, the endless succession of meetings where billions of dollars were discussed with the emotional detachment of a weather report, the late nights spent bathed in the blue glow of a monitor. He was a shadow she refused to acknowledge, a silent presence at the edge of her perfectly curated world. To her, he was a function, a piece of security hardware. To him, she was a puzzle, a fortress of ambition and ice whose foundations he couldn't begin to guess at. The first incident was subtle, almost forgettable. As he performed his routine pre-departure sweep of her armored sedan in the private garage, his gloved hand paused on the brake pedal. It felt soft, with too much travel. A civilian driver might not have noticed until it was too late. He ran a quick diagnostic. The onboard computer was spewing nonsensical error codes, and the brake fluid reservoir was weeping a single, almost invisible tear of hydraulic fluid. It wasn't an accident. It was sabotage designed to look like mechanical failure. Without a word to her, he had a secure backup vehicle brought around. Eleanor was merely annoyed by the 5-minute delay, tapping her expensive shoe impatiently, oblivious to the fact that he had just saved her from a potentially fatal accident on the freeway. A few days later, the attack was digital. 10 minutes before a critical presentation to the board of investors, a meeting that would determine the fate of a massive capital investment, her file vanished. Not just deleted, but erased from the server, the backups, everything. Panic rippled through her executive team. Voices were raised. Accusations flew. Through it all, the soldier stood by the door, his eyes scanning not the people, but the digital ether. On his secure tablet, he noticed a ghost signal, a tiny flicker of outbound data from the conference room's supposedly closed network. He moved silently to her head of IT, a man sweating through his shirt, and pointed to a line of code on the screen. Check the temp cache for a mirrored partition. The file's not gone. It's hidden. 3 minutes later, the presentation was back on the main screen. Eleanor, who had been a mask of cold fury, glanced at him. Her eyes held not gratitude, but a flicker of sharp, calculating curiosity. He had just protected her, patrimonio, her life's work, and she was beginning to realize he was more than just a man with a gun. The true nature of the threat became clear during the third incident. A security file containing the most sensitive details of the merger negotiation, details that could cripple her position and send her company's actions plummeting on the Bolsa de Valores, was reported misplaced from her office safe. But the soldier found it within the hour. It hadn't been stolen. It had been copied and uploaded to an unencrypted server, a deliberate leak designed to look like her own gross incompetence. He locked down the data and went to her directly, bypassing her staff. He found her in her penthouse apartment that night, staring out at the city lights. "This has to stop," he said, his voice low but firm. "The threats are escalating. I'm initiating a 24-hour security lockdown. Here, no one in or out." She whirled on him, her eyes flashing. "That's absurd. I have a company to run. I can't be a prisoner in my own home." "My job is to protect the asset, Miss Vance," he stated, his gaze unwavering. "Right now, you are the asset, and you are dangerously exposed." For the first time, she had no counter-argument. The quiet, unshakable authority in his voice silenced her protest. The lockdown was suffocating. The vast, opulent apartment, usually a symbol of her power and success, became a gilded cage. The silence between them was a physical presence, broken only by the hum of the air filtration system. They occupied opposite ends of the enormous living space, a chasm of glass and designer furniture separating them. Hours passed. Finally, unable to bear the quiet any longer, she spoke. "You're not like the other security guys." It was a simple observation. He looked up from the schematics of the building he was studying on his tablet. "How so?" "They're either nervous or trying too hard to be intimidating. You're calm. It's unnerving." He considered this for a moment. "In my old job, panic gets you killed. Calm keeps your team alive." He spoke of the brotherhood, of the absolute trust you place in the person next to you in a firefight, a world away from the corporate backstabbing she navigated daily. He didn't speak of the pain, only the purpose. His words seemed to unlock something in her. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, a silhouette against the glittering metropolis. "Trust," she said, the word tasting foreign on her tongue. "My father built this company from nothing. He trusted everyone, and when he died, they came for me like sharks. They thought I was just some heiress who would sell off her answer." She turned to face him, and for the first time he saw not a CEO, but a woman weighed down by the crushing legacy of a name. "I had to be harder, smarter, more ruthless than all of them just to survive. This merger, it's not about making more dinero. It's about proving I was worthy of his fortuna, his legacy." He listened, his professional mask firmly in place, but inside, something shifted. He was still analyzing the data from the incidents, cross-referencing times and methods, searching for a pattern. And then he saw it. The tampered car wouldn't have killed her, just caused a public, embarrassing accident. The deleted file was designed to make her look unprepared. The leaked data was meant to paint her as careless. He looked up from his tablet, his eyes locking with hers. "This isn't a random stalker," he said, the pieces clicking into place with cold, hard certainty. "And this isn't about hurting you physically." He stood up and walked towards her, closing the distance between them. Every single one of these incidents was designed to do one thing: destroy your reputation, to make you look incompetent and unstable right before the biggest deal of your life. This is a calculated corporate attack, Mrs. Vance, and it's coming from someone who knows you very, very well. Her mask of control cracked, just for a second. The idea that the threat was not some faceless entity, but an intimate betrayal, sent a chill through her that no security lockdown could prevent. Her mind, a finely tuned machine for calculating risk and identifying enemies, began to race through a list of names, colleagues, board members, former partners. In her world, everyone was a potential threat. "Who?" she asked, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. Before he could answer, a name surfaced in her own mind, dripping with predatory charm and a history of ruthless corporate raiding. "Julian Croft," she said, more to herself than to him. "My rival for the merger. He's the only one with the resources and the audacity." The name hung in the air between them, and the soldier filed it away. His job wasn't to speculate on her corporate enemies, but the name gave him a target to investigate. The lockdown ended the next morning, but the atmosphere had changed. The sterile distance was replaced by a fragile, unspoken alliance forged in shared vulnerability. Yet, this newfound truce was immediately put to the test. Julian Croft, as if summoned by the mere mention of his name, launched his attack not on Eleanor, but on her protector. He didn't use sabotage, he used whispers. An anonymous email landed in the inbox of every board member, detailing the soldier's military service with a sinister spin. It painted a picture of an unstable veteran, a man conditioned by violence, a walking liability placed at the heart of their multi-billion-dollar operation. Croft followed it up with a personal call to the chairman, his voice dripping with feigned concern. A man like that, so close to Eleanor, it's a risk to the entire investment, he'd purred. We can't have our company's future, our shareholders, dividends, resting on the whims of a man who might snap. The poison worked. The board convened an emergency meeting. They demanded his immediate termination. The soldier stood outside the glass-walled boardroom, watching Eleanor fight for him. He couldn't hear the words, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the hard set of her jaw. His job, the only thing keeping his mentor's workshop from going under, was hanging by a thread. He felt the old sting of being judged and dismissed, the world he fought for once again turning its back on him. Eleanor emerged from the meeting, her face pale but resolute. "You have 1 week," she said, her voice tight. 1 week to prove you're not a threat. 1 week to find a lead, or my hands are tied. The pressure was immense. He wasn't just fighting for his job anymore. He was fighting for his honor. He doubled his efforts, poring over security footage, network logs, and personnel files. The attacks had stopped, which was even more unnerving. The enemy was waiting, letting the internal pressure do its work. The break came from an unexpected place. During a routine sweep of the executive server room, he found it tucked behind a power conduit, a small, sophisticated listening device, no bigger than a coin. It was dormant, but its construction was unlike anything he'd seen in standard corporate espionage. It was custom-made, meticulously crafted. He carefully disassembled it, his brow furrowed in concentration, and then his blood ran cold. He stared at the tiny circuit board under the magnifying glass on his workbench. It wasn't the technology that made his heart hammer against his ribs. It was the artistry, a specific, almost imperceptible pattern in the soldering, a unique looping technique used to secure the wires. A signature. He'd seen it 1,000 times before, in the dim light of a dusty workshop, on devices they'd built together for training exercises. It was the unmistakable handiwork of his mentor, the man he was trying to save, the only father he'd ever known. The world tilted on its axis. Every possibility was a new form of agony. Was his mentor a willing participant? Was he the traitor? The weight of the potential betrayal was a physical blow, heavier than any enemy fire he had ever faced. He felt the foundations of his world, the very principles of loyalty and brotherhood he lived by, crumble to dust. He had to know. He drove to the workshop that night, the small device burning a hole in his pocket. The familiar scent of oil, metal, and old wood, once a source of comfort, now felt like a lie. He found his mentor, a man with hands calloused by decades of honest work, hunched over a lathe. The old man looked up, his face breaking into a warm, tired smile that quickly faded when he saw the look in the soldier's eyes. "What is it, son?" he asked, his voice full of concern. The soldier didn't speak. He simply placed the listening device on the workbench between them. The old man's eyes widened. The color drained from his face, replaced by a deep, gut-wrenching shame. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken accusations. Finally, the mentor's shoulders slumped in defeat. "He came to me a few months ago," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Julian Croft. I owed a lot of our money. Bad investments, medical bills, the debts were crushing me. Croft bought them all. He owned me." He couldn't meet the soldier's gaze, staring instead at the scarred surface of the bench. He said he just needed some custom electronics for a new security venture. Harmless prototypes. He paid well, enough to keep the wolves from the door. I swear to you, I never knew what he was using them for." The confession didn't bring relief, only a different kind of pain. His mentor wasn't a traitor, he was a victim, trapped in a web of debt and deceit. The soldier's mission had just become infinitely more complicated. He was no longer just protecting a CEO from a corporate rival. He was now caught in the middle, forced to find a way to expose a dangerous multimillionaire and save Eleanor's company, all while trying to extricate the man he loved like a father from the enemy's grasp without destroying his life in the process. He returned to her penthouse a changed man, the weight of his mentor's secret a physical burden on his shoulders. He couldn't tell her the truth. Not yet. Admitting his mentor built the devices would not only destroy the old man, but would also make him the soldier, an accomplice in the eyes of the board. He had to prove Croft's guilt first, untangle the web, and only then could he hope to pull his mentor from the wreckage. He buried the turmoil and presented a face of cold efficiency. "I have a new lead," he told her, his voice carefully neutral. "It's tenuous, but it points directly to Croft's organization." A flicker of relief crossed her face, and with it, a new and unfamiliar trust. She was beginning to see him not just as a protector, but as an ally. To counter the board's lingering doubts, Eleanor decided to do her own deep dive, to build an unassailable case for keeping him on. She requested his full, unredacted file from the security firm, a document far more detailed than the one the board had seen. She sat in her office, the city lights painting patterns on the polished floor, and opened the file. His photo stared back at her, the same intense eyes, but the name listed below was one she hadn't seen before. The field report simply called him Soldier. His real name was Caleb Sterling. The name itself meant nothing. But then she saw his service enlistment date. It was 10 years ago, almost to the day. A cold dread, sharp and sickening, washed over her. Caleb Sterling, 10 years ago, the pieces of the memory, long buried under a decade of ambition and ruthless negocios, slammed into place with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't in her penthouse anymore. She was 25 again, a young, hungry executive vice president in her father's company, desperate to be seen as more than just the heiress to his fortuna. She saw a younger Caleb, his eyes not yet hardened by war, his posture hopeful. He worked in facilities, a menial job. There had been a mistake, a trivial one. A server rack was mislabeled, causing a 30-minute delay in a system upgrade. It was nothing, but she had seen an opportunity. In front of the entire IT department, she had made an example of him, her voice dripping with calculated scorn, publicly firing him to assert her authority, to show everyone that she was not her soft-hearted father. She remembered the look on his face, the shock, the confusion, and then the deep, burning humiliation as he was escorted out by security. It was a day of triumph for her, a move that earned her a grudging respect from the old guard. For him, she now realized it was the day his civilian life ended, the day she had broken him. Guilt, a profound and alien emotion, clawed at her throat. She stood up, her legs unsteady, and walked into the living room where he was methodically analyzing network traffic. He looked up, his expression guarded. I've been reviewing your complete file," she began. Her voice strained. "Your full name, Caleb Sterling." He didn't react, but a stillness came over him, the calm before a storm. "I realize now," she continued, fumbling for the right words, the corporate jargon that had always been her shield. "We've interacted before, at my father's company. I want to say that my actions on that day were regrettable. It was a difficult business decision at the time, perhaps poorly executed. As a gesture of goodwill, I've authorized a significant bonus to be added to your compensation to account for that past inconvenience." The word hung in the air between them. Inconvenience. Caleb stared at her, his face a blank canvas, but his eyes were burning. The moment she had just dismissed as a poorly executed business decision was the single most humiliating event of his life. It was the wound that had festered for a decade, the failure that had driven him back into the arms of the military, and she thought she could fix it with dinero, with a bonus. It was the ultimate insult. It wasn't an apology, It was a transaction, an attempt to clear her conscience by adding a few more dollars to his paycheck. The fragile bridge of trust they had built over the last few weeks crumbled into dust, leaving a chasm wider and colder than before. "Understood, ma'am," he said, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. He turned back to his screen, the professional distance a wall of ice between them. He felt like a fool. He had almost let himself believe she was different, that beneath the ruthless CEO was a person worth protecting. Now he knew the truth. He was just an asset, a tool, and his past pain was just a liability she wanted to pay off. Their new, frigid reality was shattered less than an hour later. Red lights flashed silently on his security console. Alarms blared through the building's internal network. A massive security breach. He raced through the data, his personal feelings locked away. A wire transfer, $5 million, diverted from a corporate holding account to an untraceable offshore wallet dealing in cryptomoeda. It was a blatant, clumsy theft designed to be found, and every digital fingerprint, every access log pointed directly to him. The credentials used were his. The hack had originated from a terminal only he had access to. It was the perfect frame-up. The board went into a frenzy. Croft's whispers about an unstable veteran suddenly seemed prophetic. Now, he wasn't just a risk. He was a thief. They saw a greedy soldier trying to steal a piece of the corporate riqueza he was hired to protect. The call for his termination was instantaneous and unanimous. This time, they also demanded his immediate arrest. Eleanor stood before them in an emergency video conference, their angry faces staring at her from a dozen screens. They cornered her, demanding she cut him loose, save herself, and protect the company's remaining activos. This was it, the final insurmountable obstacle. Everyone watched, waiting for the ruthless CEO to do what she always did. Cut her losses and eliminate the threat to her power. But as she looked at their furious faces, she didn't see a threat in Caleb. She saw the ghost of the young man she had wronged and the silent, honorable man who had saved her life multiple times since. A profound silence fell over the virtual boardroom. The faces on the screens waited, expectant for the inevitable. They knew Eleanor Vance. They knew her to be a creature of pure logic and self-preservation, a leader who would sacrifice any piece on the board to protect her king, the company, her legacy. But in that moment, something shifted inside her. The memory of Caleb's humiliation 10 years ago wasn't just a regrettable business decision. It was a stain on her soul she hadn't known was there. To abandon him now, to let him be devoured by the wolves she had sicked on him a decade ago, felt like a betrayal not of him, but of the person she could have been. "No," she said, her voice quiet, but ringing with an unshakable finality that cut through the digital static. The board members blinked, taken aback. "I will not be firing Mr. Sterling, and I will not be calling the authorities." The chairman, a man whose face was a roadmap of corporate battles won, leaned into his camera. "Eleanor, be reasonable. The evidence is irrefutable. This isn't just about a bad hire. This is about protecting the company's assets from an internal threat. Your sentiment is misplaced." "My sentiment," she countered, her eyes like chips of ice, "is that I am being played, and so are you. This is too clean, too perfect. It's a frame job, and I will not sacrifice an innocent man to make our rivals' work easier." "Innocent?" Another board member scoffed. "He's a disgruntled soldier with access to millions of our capital." He saw an opportunity. "Then I'm staking my position on his innocence," she declared, the words leaving her lips before she had fully processed their weight. A collective gasp was audible from the speakers. "I'm asking for 48 hours. Give me 48 hours to bring you the real culprit. If I can't, you can have my resignation along with his." She didn't wait for a response. She ended the call, plunging the room into a sudden, heavy silence. She turned to face Caleb, who had heard everything through the open door. He stood there, his face unreadable. But she saw the flicker of shock in his eyes. For the first time, someone in this world of glass and steel had chosen to believe in him. It was a gesture of faith so profound, so unexpected, it momentarily disarmed him. "Why?" he asked, his voice rough. "Because my clumsy apology was an insult," she said, her own voice raw, with a sincerity he'd never heard from her. "And because I know what it's like to be set up by Julian Croft. He's not just trying to ruin my business. He's trying to dismantle my life, piece by piece. You're just the latest piece." She looked at him, the power dynamic between them completely gone. "You have 48 hours, Caleb, which means we have 48 hours. What do you need?" Forced into this desperate alliance, they worked in secret, the sprawling penthouse becoming their command center. They were no longer CEO and bodyguard, they were two soldiers in a foxhole, surrounded and outgunned. The cold, professional distance evaporated, burned away by the urgency of the ticking clock. They worked through the night, fueled by coffee and a shared sense of impending doom. He saw the cracks in her armor, the moments when fear for her company, her father's legacy, made her hands tremble. She saw the relentless focus of the soldier, the methodical way he dismantled the digital evidence, searching for the one loose thread that would unravel the entire conspiracy. "The money transfer is a ghost," he said, staring at lines of code that seemed to mock them. "It's a dead end. Croft is too smart for that. It was never about the money. It was a distraction." "Then what are we looking for?" she asked, rubbing her tired eyes. "We're not looking at the crime," he explained, his finger tracing a path on the screen. "We're looking at the frame-up itself. How did they get my credentials? How did they bypass the multi-factor authentication without tripping a single silent alarm?" They dove into the system's core logs, a place few ever looked. For hours, they found nothing but a perfectly executed hack. Then Caleb froze. "There," he whispered, pointing to a single line of code buried in a timestamp from minutes before the hack, an override, a manual security suspension lasting exactly 90 seconds. Just long enough to plant the evidence and initiate the transfer. "But who has that level of clearance?" Eleanor breathed, leaning closer. "Only me, the head of IT, and—" Her voice trailed off in disbelief. There was only one other person. A person so trusted, so ingrained in her daily life that the thought of their betrayal was absurd. "No, it's not possible." Caleb brought up the personnel file. The photo showed a smiling, unassuming woman who had been by Eleanor's side for 15 years. Her loyal executive assistant, Maria, the woman who brought her coffee, managed her impossible schedule, and knew every secret of her corporate and personal life. The betrayal was a deep, physical blow. Eleanor felt the air leave her lungs. Maria, driven by years of quiet, simmering jealousy, watching Eleanor inherit a cut fortune. She felt she had helped build but would never share. It was the one attack Eleanor could never have predicted. "We have to find her," Eleanor said, her voice hardening into steel. "Now." Caleb was already tracking her keycard's location. "She's on the executive floor. In your office." They moved quickly, taking the private elevator down. The building was quiet, most employees having gone home for the night. As they stepped onto the plush carpet of the executive suite, they saw her. Maria was standing by Eleanor's desk, calmly deleting files from the main computer. She looked up as they entered, and her face held not panic, but a cold, triumphant smile. "I knew you'd figure it out eventually," Maria said, her voice dripping with venom. "But you're too late." Before either of them could move, she pressed a single key on the keyboard. Instantly, the entire building plunged into a state of emergency. Red lights began to flash, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Heavy steel security doors slammed shut with deafening finality, sealing the floor. A synthesized voice echoed through the halls. "Security alert, level 1, building lockdown initiated. All personnel are considered hostile." secure and detain. They were trapped. The synthesized voice was clinical, devoid of emotion, which made its message all the more terrifying. Red emergency lights pulsed, embathing the opulent hallway in a blood-red glow. From down the corridor, they heard the heavy, rhythmic sound of tactical boots moving on marble. The security team, her security team, now hunting them as hostiles. For a dizzying moment, Eleanor's world tilted. She, who commanded this entire tower, this empire of glass and code, was now a fugitive within its walls. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at the edges of her composure. Caleb moved without hesitation. He grabbed her arm, his touch firm but not rough, pulling her away from the main corridor and into the shadows of a small alcove. His eyes were scanning, assessing, his entire posture transformed from a stoic guard to a field operator. This was his world now. They'll sweep the executive floors first, he said, his voice a low, urgent whisper. They think we're trapped. He glanced at Maria, who was being cuffed by the first two guards to arrive, a smug look still on her face. She had done her part. Eleanor's mind raced through security protocols, exit routes, lockdown procedures she had signed off on herself. Every single one was a dead end. They've sealed the elevators and the stairwells. There's nowhere to go. There's always somewhere to go, he countered. He pulled her toward an unmarked door she'd never even noticed, hidden behind a large decorative plant. He keyed in a simple numeric code on a dusty, forgotten panel beside it. The door clicked open, revealing not an office, but a dark, narrow space filled with the hum of machinery and the smell of dust and ozone. A service corridor. "How did you know that code?" she breathed, her voice barely audible. He paused for a fraction of a second, looking at her in the pulsating red light. 10 years ago, before I re-enlisted, I worked construction. My crew installed the primary ventilation systems for this entire tower. The irony was staggering. The job from the life she had destroyed was now the key to saving her future. The skills he learned as a nobody in her father's empire were now her only hope. He led her into the darkness, closing the door behind them. The world of polished mahogany and panoramic views vanished, replaced by a maze of pipes, conduits, and rattling air ducts. It was a hidden world that existed between the walls of her own company. They moved in silence, Caleb navigating the labyrinthine passages with an unnerving confidence, his hand occasionally brushing a wall or a junction box, as if reading a map written in Braille. For Eleanor, it was utterly disorienting. She, who knew the value of every single one of her company's ativos down to the last cent, had no idea this skeletal underbelly even existed. She had to trust him completely, following his silhouette in the dim emergency lighting that filtered through the grates. After what felt like an eternity, he stopped at a junction, pointing to a small maintenance terminal on the wall. "I need to see what they're really doing," he said, pulling a compact device from his pocket and connecting it to the port. Lines of code scrolled across the small screen. "The lockdown wasn't just to trap us," he murmured. His eyes narrowed in concentration. It was to isolate the network's core. Isolate it for what? He didn't answer immediately. His fingers flew across the keypad, bypassing security layers she didn't even know existed. The money transfer, Maria's betrayal. It was all noise, a perfectly executed distraction to make everyone look in the wrong direction while the real attack was set in motion. He turned the screen towards her. On it was a single, elegant piece of malware, a digital time bomb, dormant and waiting. "This is Croft's endgame." He explained it in stark, simple terms. The program was tied to the live-streamed merger announcement, scheduled to begin in less than 30 minutes. The moment her network interfaced with the stock exchange to finalize the deal, the bomb would activate. "It's not a ransomware attack, and it's not a data theft," Caleb said, his voice grim. "It's a system-wide wipe. It will trigger a catastrophic failure that will erase everything. Your R&D, your financial records, your entire intellectual patrimonio." It will make this multi-billion-dollar company worthless in less than 5 seconds. The scale of the attack was horrifying. It was a corporate execution. Croft wasn't planning a hostile takeover. He was planning to burn her entire empire to the ground, then sift through the ashes. With her company's assoys hitting zero and its reputation shattered, he could acquire her patents and infrastructure from the bankruptcy proceedings for a pittance. It was a brutal, sociopathic, but brilliant plan to build his own fortuna on the grave of hers. "Where is it?" she asked, her voice shaking with a cold fury. "Where is the device?" "It has to be physically connected to the central server," he replied, disconnecting his device. "It's the only way to ensure a wipe this complete can't be stopped remotely." He looked at her, his expression grim. "We have to get to the server room, now." He pointed down a long, dark corridor. "It's on the sub-level, directly beneath us." The sound of boots echoed from a grate above them. The security teams were getting closer, their search patterns becoming more systematic. They were running out of time. They plunged deeper into the mechanical guts of the building. The air grew cooler, thick with the metallic tang of conditioned air and the low-frequency hum of immense power. Above them, the footsteps of the security team were a constant, menacing drumbeat, a reminder that the world they knew was actively hunting them. Eleanor, who could command boardrooms with a single glance, now found herself utterly dependent. Her expensive heels clicking awkwardly on the grated metal walkway, she followed Caleb's every move, her fear a tight knot in her chest, but it was mingled with a strange, burgeoning sense of awe. He moved through this hidden world with a grace and purpose she had never seen in him. "This way," he whispered, turning down a passage that seemed to go straight down. It was a steep service ladder, bolted to the wall, descending into near total darkness. "And it's the fastest route." Without a second thought, she followed him down, the cold metal rungs biting into her hands. The sounds of their pursuers began to fade, replaced by the thrum of the building's heart. They emerged into a vast, cavernous space, chilled to near freezing. Rows upon rows of black monolithic server racks stood in silent formation, their blinking blue and green lights reflecting endlessly off the polished concrete floor. This was the digital soul of her empire, the repository of every idea, every transaction, every secret that constituted her entire patrimonio liquido. And in the center of the room, tethered to the main network hub with thick, black cables, was a device that didn't belong. It was a sleek, metallic box, no larger than a briefcase, with a single glowing red screen displaying a countdown timer, 14:27. 14 minutes until her life's work, her father's legacy, was turned into digital dust. They approached it cautiously. The device was a masterpiece of malevolent engineering. As they got closer, a proximity sensor triggered, and the screen flickered, revealing 2 input fields. One was a biometric fingerprint scanner, glowing a faint blue. The other was a standard numeric keypad, awaiting a passcode, a 2-factor lock, Caleb said, his voice grim. "Physical and digital. The fingerprint scanner will be keyed to the person who armed it, Croft or Maria." It was an insurmountable obstacle. They couldn't force it. "What about the passcode?" Eleanor asked, her mind racing through every possible combination. Birthdays, account numbers, corporate codes. It could be anything. Caleb studied the keypad, his soldier's mind analyzing the threat. "Croft is arrogant. He's a sadist. This whole attack is personal. The code won't be random. It'll be a message, something to twist the knife." On the large monitors mounted to the far wall, a live feed of the merger announcement began. The chairman of the board was at the podium, his face a mask of strained confidence, stalling for time. He was unaware that the very Gativos he was about to merge were on the verge of ceasing to exist. The countdown on the device ticked down. 10:03. Panic began to set in. "Think, Eleanor," Caleb urged, his voice steady, cutting through her rising terror. "What does Croft know about you? What moment of weakness, what failure would he use to mock you in the end? She racked her brain, her thoughts a chaotic storm of corporate battles, failed deals, personal slights. Nothing seemed significant enough, cruel enough. The timer hit 07 TAS. The chairman was beginning the final preamble, preparing to announce the electronic finalization of the deal that would trigger the wipe. Then, the assistant's face flashed through her mind. Maria, she had been with Eleanor for 15 years. She knew everything. She knew every success, every failure, every secret triumph, and she knew every cruelty. Maria, Eleanor whispered, the name tasting like ash. She knew. She knew everything. Caleb looked at her, understanding dawning in his eyes. What did she know, Eleanor? What would she have told him? And then it hit her, a memory so sharp, so brutal. It stole the air from her lungs, a day of triumph for her, a day of devastation for him, a day that Croft, through Maria, would know was the perfect psychological weapon, the ultimate insult. A date. Her blood ran cold. She looked from the ticking clock, 0312, to Caleb's face, seeing not the hardened soldier, but the ghost of the young, hopeful man she had publicly destroyed. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Croft hadn't just built a bomb to destroy her company. He had designed it so that the only way to save it was for her to relive and acknowledge her single greatest act of personal cruelty. The final key to saving her, Fortuna, was the very date she had shattered his life. With trembling hands, her heart hammering against her ribs, she stepped forward. "I know it," she said, her voice a ragged whisper. Caleb watched her, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning horror as he began to understand. As the chairman on the screen announced the final protocol for the digital handshake, Eleanor reached for the keypad. The countdown showed 0030. She took a deep breath, looked Caleb directly in the eye, a silent, agonizing apology passing between them, and began to type, month, day, year, the date she had fired him 10 years ago. She pressed the final key as the timer hit 00.03. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, with a soft click, the red screen went black. The device was dead. The system was safe. The silence that followed was more profound than any alarm. It was the sound of a catastrophe that hadn't happened. Eleanor sagged against one of the server racks, the adrenaline leaving her system in a sudden, debilitating wave. She looked at Caleb, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror, gratitude, and a shame so deep it was almost a physical presence. The numbers she had typed onto that keypad were seared into her memory, a permanent brand marking her cruelty and his salvation. Before they could speak, the heavy doors to the server room burst open. A full tactical team, armed and ready, swarmed in, their weapons pointed directly at Caleb. "Freeze! On the ground! Now!" the team leader shouted. For a split second, the old instincts flared in Caleb. His body tensed, ready to react, to neutralize the threat. But then he saw Eleanor step in front of him, her body shielding his. "Stand down," she commanded, her voice, though trembling slightly, carrying the unmistakable weight of absolute authority. "Every one of you, stand down. He is with me. He just saved this company." The guards hesitated, confused, their weapons still raised. The team leader looked from his CEO, disheveled but defiant, to the man she was protecting. "Ma'am, our orders are—" "Your orders have changed," she snapped, her confidence returning like a tide. "The threat has been neutralized. The lockdown is to be lifted on my authority. Find Julian Croft. He will be in his downtown office, likely watching this unfold. Detain him." The order was so clear, so final, that the team complied without another word. They lowered their weapons. A quiet murmur of radio chatter filling the air as the chain of command reasserted itself. In that moment, the power dynamic of the entire building righted itself. She was the CEO again. But as she turned back to Caleb, the look in her eyes was anything but corporate. It was raw, vulnerable, and filled with an unspoken apology that was 1,000 times more meaningful than her first, clumsy attempt. The apprehension of Julian Croft was anticlimactic. They found him just as she predicted, sitting in his minimalist office overlooking the city, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand. He didn't resist. His private security, 2 imposing men in sharp suits, were disarmed by Caleb with a quiet, unnerving efficiency that involved no violence, only a series of precise movements that exploited their stances and overconfidence. Croft simply smiled as the police led him away, a smug, knowing look on his face that chilled Eleanor to the bone. His arrogance became terrifyingly clear over the next few hours. In a sterile conference room, surrounded by her lawyers, the situation was laid bare. The evidence was a house of cards. Maria, his mole, had confessed, but Croft's lawyers were already painting her as an unstable, disgruntled employee acting alone. The digital trail was a labyrinth of proxies and dead ends. The device in the server room had Croft's fingerprint lock, but he would claim it was planted, that he was being framed by a desperate rival. "It's his word against ours," her lead counsel said, his face grim. "He's a multi-millionaire, with a legal team that can tie this up in court for years. They'll argue that every piece of digital evidence was planted by you or your rogue bodyguard. He's going to walk, Eleanor. He might even countersue and damage your company's capitalism and reputation further." The victory that had felt so absolute in the server room now tasted like ash. They had won the battle, but it seemed Croft, with his immense riqueza and legal firepower, was about to win the war. The system she had built her life around, the one that valued dollars and plausible deniability above all else, was about to let her destroyer go free. Caleb stood by the window, watching the morning light break over the city. He'd been silent throughout the meeting, a stoic presence absorbing the bitter reality. He had done his job, protected the asset, but justice felt impossibly out of reach. He felt a familiar sense of powerlessness, the same feeling he'd had 10 years ago, watching a world of corporate power crush him without a second thought. It was then that his phone buzzed. A simple text from a restricted number. "I'm at the main police precinct. I need to see you." He showed the message to Eleanor. A new wave of dread washed over her, his mentor. In the chaos, she had almost forgotten the man who had built the devices. They arrived at the precinct to find a scene of quiet dignity. His mentor, the old man with calloused hands and a lifetime of regret in his eyes, was sitting with a detective. He wasn't in handcuffs. He had walked in on his own. On the table in front of him was a worn, leather-bound ledger and a portable hard drive. "I told them everything," he said, his voice steady, looking directly at Caleb. The shame was still there, but it was overshadowed by a quiet resolve. "Croft was meticulous. He made me keep detailed notes, schematics, records of every payment to my Shell account. He thought it was another form of blackmail, another way to own me. He never imagined I'd use it against him." He pushed the ledger and the drive across the table. "It's all in there. Signed invoices, encrypted emails from his personal server, even recordings of our meetings. It's not digital evidence that can be faked. It's a paper trail, a confession. It's irrefutable proof." Caleb stared at the man who had been his father, his hero. He was saving them all, but at an immense personal cost. By confessing, he was implicating himself. He was trading his freedom for theirs. The victory was finally, undeniably real, but it was bittersweet, bought with the sacrifice of the one person Caleb had been fighting to save. In the sterile quiet of the police precinct, the weight of that sacrifice settled over them. Caleb watched as his mentor was led away, not in shame, but with the quiet dignity of a man who had finally made things right, no matter the cost. Eleanor stood beside him, her hand hovering near his arm but not touching, respecting the invisible wall of his grief. The vast corporate fortuna she had just saved felt meaningless in the face of this profound, personal loss. They had won, but the victory was etched with sorrow. In the days that followed, the corporate world righted itself with brutal efficiency. With the mentor's ledger and confession, Julian Croft's legal fortress crumbled. His empire of deceit was dismantled. His dativos frozen, and he faced a future measured in decades, not dividendos. Eleanor's company, once on the brink of annihilation, was now more secure than ever. The failed attack had exposed its vulnerabilities, and in fixing them, she had made it stronger. A week later, she called Caleb to her office. The panoramic view of the city was the same, the polished desk as imposing as ever, but the space between them had been irrevocably altered. She wasn't just a client anymore, and he was far more than a bodyguard. "Caleb," she began, her voice formal but lacking its former icy edge. "The board has approved a new position, Director of Global Security. It would report directly to me. The compensation package is substantial. A 7-figure salary, stock options that would make you a significant shareholder in this company's future, a new life, security, a share in the riqueza you protected." She laid it all out on the table, a golden key to the world he had only ever seen from the outside. It was more a dinero than he could have ever imagined, a chance to build a patrimonio that would last for generations. It was everything he thought he needed when he first took the job, the ability to solve any financial problem, to live without the fear of debt that had ensnared his mentor. He listened patiently, his expression unreadable, and when she finished, he gave her a small, sad smile. "Thank you, Eleanor. It's a generous offer." He paused, looking out at the city below. "But I can't accept it." She blinked, confusion clouding her features. "I don't understand. Is it not enough? We can negotiate." "It's not about the money," he said, turning to face her fully. His gaze was direct, and for the first time, she saw no trace of the subordinate, only the man. "For 10 years, I've been following orders, serving someone else's mission. First the army, then you. I came here looking for a way to save a part of my past, but what I found is that I need to build a future of my own." He took a breath, the words coming from a place of deep, hard-won clarity. "To truly be the man I need to be, I can't be your employee. I can't live in your world, protected by your capital. My journey was never about becoming a multimillionario. It was about finding my place, my own worth, and I can't find that in your shadow, no matter how comfortable it is." The finality in his voice was gentle but absolute. She understood then. For them to ever have a chance, the power dynamic had to be erased completely. He needed to be her equal, not in wealth, but in spirit, and he could only achieve that on his own terms. The final scene isn't in a boardroom or a penthouse. It's 3 weeks later, in a small, quiet cafe bathed in the warm light of a late afternoon sun. The air smells of coffee and fresh pastries. Caleb sits at a small table by the window, nursing a cup of black coffee. He looks different. The tension is gone from his shoulders. The haunted, weary look in his eyes has been replaced by a calm sense of purpose. He is at peace. The bell above the door jingles, and Eleanor walks in. She's not wearing a power suit, but simple jeans and a soft sweater. Her hair is down, and she wears almost no makeup. She is not the CEO of a corporate empire. She is simply a woman looking for a man in a cafe. She slides into the chair opposite him, a small, tentative smile on her face. "You look good," she says, and it's the truest thing she's said to him. "I feel good," he replies, his own smile easy and genuine. "I used my savings to set up a trust for my mentor's family. They'll be taken care of while he's away. And I filed the paperwork this morning. Sterling Security Solutions. It's small, just me for now, but it's a start. It's mine." He was building his own small negocios, his own legacy, not with inherited Benz or stock market assoins, but with his own two hands, just like his mentor had. Eleanor doesn't offer to help, doesn't offer an investment or her connections. She knows that would defeat the entire purpose. Instead, she just nods, her eyes shining with an unguarded admiration he has never seen before. "I have no doubt it will be a success," she says. They sit in comfortable silence for a moment, two survivors who have faced the ghosts of their pasts and emerged, changed, on the other side. The soldier who spent a decade searching for love, for a place to belong, had finally stopped searching. He had started building. He looks at her, the woman he once resented, then protected, then came to understand. "I was wondering," he says, his voice steady and clear. "Are you free for dinner on Friday?" She breaks into a wide, brilliant smile, a smile so genuine and full of light it transforms her entire face. "Yes, Caleb," she says, "I am." And in that simple moment, a soldier's long war finally came to an end, and a man's life, filled with the promise of a love earned through forgiveness, was just beginning. If you were moved by this story of redemption and second chances, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more tales that touch the heart, and share your favorite moment in the comments below. We love hearing from you. Thanks for watching.